Mark Peters is the CEO of Butterball Farms, a leading producer of culinary butter and margarine. It was recognized as one of the best and brightest companies to work for from 2018 to 2024. He began his career as a factory worker at 12 and later took over the family business at 30 with a focus on not only financial success, but worker well-being. And we're going to talk a lot about that today. In 2003, he co-founded The Source, a nonprofit helping workers overcome personal challenges. He authored 2 books, The Source and coming in June, The Retention Trap. So depending on when you're listening to this, it's either out or about to come out. Mark is a sought-after speaker, lives in Grand Rapids with his daughter and dog. And I can't wait to, Mark, discuss your journey and share kind of a movement, I'll call it, that you started that, went well beyond your company. So Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. I'm super happy to be here today. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, and this seems to be an ongoing theme that many of my guests somehow I either met through Vistage, which if you don't know, and you should, is a kind of CEO peer group, mastermind group. If you don't know them, look them up. So a lot of my guests are either folks I met because they were in a Vistage group I talked to, or they're other Vistage certified speakers. So there's a theme. But anyway, Mark, so the first question I always ask that I want to ask you is, in all of your experience, what do you believe is the number one characteristic of a great leadership team?
Mike, I can sum that up in one word. It's called trust. And I don't mean that lightly. I've just gone through about a 2.5-year experience, which kind of led me through a turnaround situation where we ended up with a high degree of mistrust on our executive team, and it filtered down throughout the whole organization. And one of the things that I learned through that process is that as the CEO, I tolerated an undercurrent of mistrust far longer than I should have. And it turned into some really toxic behavior. And I think that, that's when you and I really connected, was your leadership assessment that talks about toxic teams. And I tell you, I sat in that meeting and I ranked my executive team, and every single one of them came up toxic. That was a bad day for me.
You're welcome.
But the underlying theme, when I go back, was really around trust. And, one of our guiding principles is to communicate openly and honestly to promote effective teamwork. And we were not communicating honestly with each other. And that requires some tough conversations. Not everything is sunshine and roses at the top of a company. You've got to make decisions about assigning capital, and you've got to make decisions about customers and pricing. And it doesn't always make every department super happy. But you've got to be able to have those conversations, and you've got to be able to do it in a way that maintains trust. So I would double down on that statement.
Yeah, and I love what you said. It was a problem because you tolerated it.
I tell you, 100%.
Yeah, and what I love about hearing that, and kudos to you for thinking of it that way, is there are a lot of leaders that I meet with that point the finger externally.
Oh.
Why aren't these people more trustworthy? Why isn't there more trust? And saying you tolerated it means you understand that if there's a lack of trust, it's stemming from you. It's stemming from your behavior, whether you are not trusting enough to communicate honestly and or you're accepting it in your organization. So I love that you took ownership for it.
Yeah. Yep. So that was, it's a big learning for me.
Tell me a little bit about, I definitely want to dive into The Source, which is the nonprofit that you founded, and the book, and then we'll talk about your new book and all things around that. But I want to start off a little bit with your story. So tell me a little bit about Butterball Farms. And then I want to go into kind of your story from a kid growing up in the business. But first, tell me a little bit about the business.
I always hate those introductions because it sounds like you're trying to pack a whole lifetime of history into like 2 sentences. My business we're second generation family business. Our history is making butter with designs on it. My father said, embossed butter is what our company did. So historically we did any big branded hotel that you can think of from say 20 years ago or 30 years ago, we probably did their logos. Hyatt, Sheraton, Westin, Ritz-Carlton, Wyndham, we lots of them. But they all ran their own restaurants in those days. They ran their own food and beverage and catering, and so those were sort of our big customers around the country when I took the business over. So I started working for him when I was 12, and he told me there was no more summers at the lake for me. Time to go to work. But I talk a little bit about it in my book, The Source. But he got all of the supervisors around his desk, and he introduced me as his son. And he said, "Now, if he does anything wrong, just fire him. Don't come talk to me. Just fire him."
I love
And
it.
my dad just didn't bluff, right? So I'm this impressionable 12-year-old kid, and I took him at his word. So I learned early on to make a lot of friends. I got to know the people that I was working with. And really, it's kind of interesting because people say when they read The Source and some of the themes that are in the book, it's like, growing up the way you grew up, how did you end up here? And, I can point to some of my Christian values and, some of those things, but I really think it was the lived experience that started when I was 12 with the people in the plant and really having this need to get to know the people I was working with to protect my own job. So somewhat, whatever the word I'm looking for is.
Self-preservation.
Yeah, self-preservation. But what I learned that the people that were working in our family business lived very different lives than I lived. I mean, they were concerned about paycheck to paycheck. They were concerned about buying groceries. They were concerned about keeping their kids off the street. They were concerned about buying shoes, about whether they could repair their car or not, or, things that never, ever entered my field of thought as a kid or a young adult. So I think that 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, those years where I was in the plant working and really getting to know the people that worked for us and then seeing how my dad treated them was really the genesis for a lot of the thought process that went into the book, The Source in particular, and the founding of The Source. So.
And what is that when you said the way your dad treated them? Was it a good example or a bad example?
Oh, sorry. That's a great question. I sort of thought that I implied it was a bad example, but
that's what I thought. I wanted to be real clear.
So to be more specific, we didn't have health insurance, no 401k. I mean, it was like, this is how much I pay you an hour, and this is what I expect you to do. And that's the beginning and the end of the work contract, and he legitimately treated most of the people that came to work for us like a different class of citizen. And again, I don't, my religious upbringing would have suggested that everybody was created in God's image. So everybody requires a certain level of dignity. And I really struggled with the difference between, my dad at home, my dad at church, and my dad at work. And my dad at work was it was acted out very differently, and it didn't make any sense to me. And I got to meet people who were just really amazing individuals and working really hard for their family and committed to their family. But they were not treated like that in our workplace.
And what do you believe? So you grow up in the business and you see that as an example of that's not the way I want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it shapes some beliefs that you have. Tell me more about, what do you believe? There are a lot of leaders who are very good people and treat their people okay.
Yeah.
But their focus is very much profitability of the business.
Sure.
And of course, if you don't focus on profitability, you don't have a business. So
Right.
you've got to focus there. But I know you have some very strong beliefs about the responsibility a company has to their people.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear more about how you think about that.
Yeah. You know what? And I do think lots of leaders have different approaches, and that's fine. I just am going to try to think of the most succinct way to say this. I think that we have, so I'll just say, instead of saying we or us as entrepreneurs or anything like that, and hopefully I can inspire some other people to think in a similar way. I have this enterprise where people come to work and spend 40 plus hours a week under my influence. And when I say that, it's the way they're treated and how we show up as an employer, how I show up as an employer. And if that work environment is toxic or demeaning or not honoring, not interested in what makes somebody successful, those people go home, and that workplace experience affects the way they act at home. Now, most of our employees are 40 hours plus. I mean, we're a full-time employer up from the top all the way down to the plant floor. So people that are coming into my house are spending more time with me than they are in any other sector of their life. So I can either choose to be intentional about that influence, or I can choose to not be intentional about it. But not being intentional about it is a choice. And so I have, ever since my father passed away, worked very hard to try to design a workplace where people who are coming in to put food in boxes can have the best possible work experience, from their team, the way they're treated, development opportunities, simple things like please and thank you, keeping the environment clean so that they've got great space to be in. All sorts of other sorts of, respect and interest kinds of things. And that's really what led me to start The Source. Was I could not provide, there's so many people in my workforce that had complexities in their lives that I couldn't help them with. And I really wanted to do something more around helping people address, again, we talked about a little bit earlier, like whether it's transportation or housing or childcare, or somebody in their family has medical issues they don't know how to deal with. We're not a social agency. You said earlier, we have to be profitable. We can't just, pay everybody's bills for them. We've got to set a wage rate. We've got to run a profitable business. But at the same point in my life that I'm thinking about these things, I'm also serving on a couple of inner city nonprofit boards. And I'm realizing that a lot of these organizations, and I would suspect a lot of your listeners do the same thing. This is not an uncommon dynamic in my experience of business leaders who also serve in a nonprofit world, something that they're passionate about. But what I got really interested in was that those organizations that I served on the board of were great at telling their stories to their donors and their supporters. They were far less effective at getting their clients. And then the next step of that thinking was that those clients work for me. And then I'm like, well, how am I sharing these services out to the people that work for me? And that was the skeleton structure of what became The Source, where The Source became this conduit for employees of the member companies to find resources that would help them in almost any situation, with the goal of staying at work. So that none of those things in their lives would create an event that would take them out of their employment. So, I was so focused on trying to change that work experience for people that I actually went out and got other businesses to help me build something to do this. And we've got almost 22 years of data on The Source and 28 member companies. It's pretty amazing what it's turned into. Anyway, I'm kind of going in all different directions.
No, and I'm not stopping you, because that's the heart of, I think, what's so different and what's so important of The reason I was so interested in having you on the show is that we're not just talking about, what kind of culture we should be creating in our business and how you retain employees, and all those things are important. And both of us have written books on those things. So super important.
Right.
Buy our books, absolutely. But you went well beyond and said, wait a minute, there may be a new model here
Yeah.
because as we're not running, and you've got a very successful business, but it's not Google or Meta or Apple, where it's a company big enough where if that's what you want to offer up and make available to your employees, you've got a company that's a $50 billion, $100 billion company. You could build those things if you
Right.
want. You may or may not do it, but you can. But what you've done is said, wait a minute, there's a whole bunch of mid-market companies out there, small companies out there that just don't have the money or the time or the expertise or the resources to do these things. And therefore, I'm going to figure out a different way to get it done.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really what it was. And here's what, so here's what's interesting to me. And I think one of the themes in the source and also in the retention trap is, as employers, as entrepreneurs, we're really good at problem solving. In fact, I would argue that's our superpower for the world. That's how you start a business. You have either a better way or a different way, or you've got a product, a service, a formula, something that's different, better, creates a better outcome for your customers. And then you're successful at it. You've got to hire people. What's interesting to me is we don't tend to apply our problem solving skills internally, especially around our people, nearly as well as we do externally, especially around our customers. Right. And so, many times through the history of building the source, we talk to employers and ask them, like, how many people do you think in your organization are getting some sort of government assistance? Now, the source can take the roster of Social Security numbers and run it through whatever database they run it through, and they can tell you what percentage of your workforce is getting, like, Department of Health and Human Services benefits. It's shocking to me how many people have no clue as to the number or percentage of their workforce that may be receiving government benefits on top of their wages. And so I think that one of my hopes with the book, The Source, is to get other leaders to be a little bit more curious about the composition of their workforce, and then get a little bit more curious about how they can positively impact that. We've had people say about the source that it's almost more important to them than their health insurance benefits. Because what the source does is it's available at exactly the moment of need. Not that health insurance isn't, but health insurance can be complex, and a lot of people are generally pretty healthy. They may go a whole year and not need it. But if they're looking at getting evicted, that's a pretty emergency need for their family. They need to have that solved quickly, and their landlord ain't helping them out. So at the moment that need occurs, that the perceived value of that benefit for the employees is outweighed significantly. And that drives a stickiness with us as an employer.
Yeah, that's what's so interesting about this. And you said this earlier, so I'm going to come back to it is, you could look at this as a very, altruistic, we need to treat people in, the right way. And I like what you said earlier, about when you invite people into your house.
Yeah.
You didn't say business, you said house. And that's a very different feeling and a very different level of ownership and caring about people outside the work. It's all very, it's all wonderful.
Right.
And at the same time, the other thing you said was it helps make sure people don't have issues that take them away from work.
Right.
So there's an ROI there as well,
Yeah.
where this is not just being a good guy. This is smart business.
Right. Well, and you know what, Mike, the great thing about the source, the organization, is that we now have 22 years of data. And you mentioned ROI, but the average over all of those 22 years, the average ROI to employers is just over 200%. And we measure that based on it's hard to measure something that doesn't happen. So if the source has 3 interactions with an individual in a year, it's considered a job save. And that the history of that agreement is that when the original employers that came together, we all had a 3 times and you're out policy around attendance. So, and then we assigned a value to the cost of having to replace somebody. And I don't know what the number they use now, but when we started, it was like $3,200. I can tell you for my organization, the cost of one turnover event now in an entry level position is about $8,500. And that's if somebody leaves us in the first 90 days of employment. And, that's another one of those problems, I think, that most employers see those turnover calculators and they legitimately don't believe the numbers. They're so big that we don't believe them. But when you start solving for that stuff, you see things like safety gets better, defects go down, people are problem solving, all the small issues that come up in a business much faster and in alignment. They care about the work environment. It's cleaner. You have less sort of behavioral incidences in your facilities. And we in our business have tracked all of that. We can see that correlation. So anyway, I believe that there's a definite return, and our cost to our business to the source now is roughly 50 grand a year. So I say you're getting like this supercharged HR person for a fraction of what it would cost you today.
You've given some examples, but tell me a little bit more of the types of services that are now made available to your team members. Give us a few more examples of what those are so people could better picture what something like the source could do.
Yeah. So in particular, the source again is a conduit. We didn't build an organization to recreate resources that are available in the community. We basically went out. The idea was to utilize services that exist in the community. So this past year, housing was the biggest issue. And I think that's probably true across the country. Housing's expensive. Rental housing is expensive, difficult to get. The other thing that plays into that is people's credit score. So if you have a bad credit score, it's really hard to get a place to live. And so the source does offer some financial assistance and some financial training. They actually have a credit union that comes along and offers those services. They also have like a small dollar loan program. And again, I would suspect that many of the people that are listening to this have done this. They'll give employees loans. They'll take it out of their paycheck. That's great, but there's always a risk. So we've outsourced all of that to the source. They do all of that, and they can get information from individuals that you just can't get as an employer, to really help hold people accountable for paying them back and giving them the skills to manage their budget. Food scarcity has actually been a big one. And so, helping people and so you say, okay, food scarcity, that means there's not a grocery store that's got great food nearby where somebody lives. Yep, that's true. There's more to that though. There's the food that's available in some of our inner city locations is not great from a nutritional perspective. So part of it is also teaching people about nutrition, like how does eating certain foods affect you, right? So the source offers some of that nutritional counseling as well, along with offering assistance in getting people a full, making food more accessible to their families. Transportation. I mean, those are right now, those are the top three transportation issues. You got the same issues with cars today. I mean, the interest rates have driven loan rates up on cars. So transportation, even to get an inexpensive car, some of our employees would be looking at a 20 to 25% interest rate, and a lot of people that are listening to this are going to cringe. Like, who would ever pay 25% for a car loan? Well, if that's the only way you're going to get to work, you may not have another option, but you're not getting a great car, which means pretty soon you're going to have a car repair, right? Pretty soon that car's not going to run to get you to work, and then you've got a different problem. So again, the source actually has developed some relationship with, some auto dealers, other people in people that do car repairs and restoration, and also with the bank relationships. We'll work through some of those things to help make transportation affordable. They also will do things that help with, like, getting people to the right bus lines. The other thing that the source can do is communicate back to the company. So like, hey, we're working through an issue with this employee. If you guys could give them a little grace, we think we can fix it in 30 days. And, again, we're probably far more likely to trust that the source has done some homework and they're like, look, we got this and we're going to get this person back to stability, than somebody who's going to come in and they're not going to tell you what the root cause problem is in their life. And it's going to sound like a bunch of excuses. And then they're probably going to end up losing their job for attendance. And so they've been able to shift that dynamic so that, the HR team will know, hey, we're going to give this person a little bit of grace while the source works through it, and we should be good on the other side. And believe me, when an employer does that for an individual, especially at that, more entry level group of folks, they've never been treated like that. Talk about being treated differently than any employer has ever treated them. We will get people to say, okay, maybe it's time to go look for another job, but I want to go to work for another source company, because they don't want to give up that sort of what becomes a trusted and knowledgeable relationship in their lives.
Is the source right now, is it just in Grand Rapids and that area, or is it expanded beyond that?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So the original source is West Michigan. Actually, they're in the process of expanding to the east side of the state with a partnership with Corewell Health, which is just fantastic. The adaptations of the source are all across the country. Like, I'm on the board of an organization called Work-Life Partnership, and they have so the people that go out and help actually interact with our employees are called resource navigators. So the Work-Life Partnership is got a resource navigator model that's not quite as high touch. Some of it's remote, some of it's remotely or, over Zoom. And they've operated in over 35 states. But then there's other, like, I helped the Fresno area set up what they call it Heartland Compass. There's another source adaptation out in Washington. There's a couple out in the East Coast. So there's a growing number of these adaptations around the country, which is, it's fantastic to see. It's fantastic to see people starting to understand that. And Mike, I actually really believe that I know enough entrepreneurs, and so do you, and that, like you said, they're good people. If they knew there was a way to help the people that work for them solve some of these problems, they'd be the first people to sign up for it. I mean, we both know that's true. The problem is the problems are so deep and complex and it's not our core competency. It's like, I don't have the bandwidth to do that. But now we've got history, we've got data, we've got models across the country where an interested employer they don't have to recreate this. We've got a template that can be used if they're in a community that doesn't have access to a source like or one of the adaptations, which I think I hope this just keeps growing and keeps gaining momentum. And the other thing that I like about it, I have this, do you mind if we take a little side trip into capitalism theory for a moment?
Sure. Love side trips.
You know, we get there's a lot of media talk about, is capitalism dead? And, there's a lot of maybe unknown and turmoil and lots of division. And, over 50% of America works for small and mid-market companies. And these are, I believe, probably people that are listening to your show, people that I get to go speak to. Um, they show up every day, they run their businesses, they care about their people. What I love about this model is, as employers, we get some value from people that stay at work and are engaged in what we do. And so we're not looking for government funding to run that nonprofit. We're funding that nonprofit. And we're getting some value from the work that they do, which means that is a sustainable nonprofit because they're returning measurable value to the community. And I think that's a really great aspect of capitalism. Yes, we have to be profitable. We do get to build our equations, right, within our organizations, and we get to decide what we spend some of our money on. And so I think that this model really does help build strength and stability into our communities through doing what we do, and that's being great employers. So I think it's a capitalist model. I really do. It doesn't require government funding. It doesn't require picking a political side of the aisle to keep it going. It doesn't require religious affiliation. It requires some hard work, and it requires a little bit of understanding about the people that come to work for you.
For a leader that loves this idea, and I hope everybody loves this idea, for a leader that loves this idea and says, hey, I want to do something like this or get involved in something like this, what's the best way to find out if some similar model exists in their area?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, what's the best way for maybe them to start that up in their local area?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we're sharing like my LinkedIn connection and whatnot. My office will gladly run that down. I mean, you can go online and look up that, grsource.org. I don't think we provided that contact, but we can.
And we'll put that in the show notes. So
Yeah.
everybody's got that.
But, to see what it's about. But I would say if people want to contact me through LinkedIn, that's probably the easiest. And I will find out. And if somebody's interested in being a champion, I'd love to talk to them. And again, because there's experts around the country now that know how to do this. So we're not starting from scratch.
Love it. Love it. And thanks so much for offering that. So now I want to turn to your new book coming out in June, or depending on when you're listening to this, it came out in June of 2025. And Mark and I both at this point, again, depending on when you're listening, we both have books we're working on that are launching in the not too distant future. But so your new book is called The Retention Trap.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that book and why you decided to write it.
This is going to sound a little, we just talked about these things that you can do as an employer to help retain your employees. And now I'm going to tell you to not focus on retaining your employees. But, I don't think it's that much different. And Mike, I think we were chatting pre-show and I told my writer the reason. She said, why do you want to write this book? And she was talking about the source. And I said, so I can write my second book. She goes, that's a really bad idea. Nobody does that. I'm like, well, I think what I want to communicate is I've been doing this workforce development and talent investment for over 20 years, and I know that it works. But the retention trap, I've gotten to the point, Mike, where I believe that we spend far too much time focusing on how to keep employees. And it's led us to some really not great, in fact, I do argue in the book, some places that don't serve us. And if we would do a better job at focusing on investing in the people that work for us and being less concerned about whether they stay or not, understanding that people don't show up to work for us and then we get to keep them forever. That's not how it works. And, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's a regional president of a bank. And he says, wait a minute. He said, where am I going to find the extra money in my budget to make these investments in education and talent and whatnot? And I said, well, he said, I'm going to do that and then they're going to leave. I'm like, look, they're leaving anyway. And the fact that people are leaving all of our companies for various different jobs is a cost to us. There's turbulence when that happens. And a lot of times we don't have a lot of notice, which means, we're hiring contractors, we're asking people to fill in. We don't tend to quantify those costs very well. And again, going back to the problem solving skills, we also don't tend to try to apply our problem solving skills to this problem. What I believe is that if we spend more of our money and our time, first of all, understanding what people want to learn, and then investing in them learning that, I believe we get stronger, more robust organizations. And I also believe and have some history. I don't have a working model yet, Mike, but I'm going to get there in the next 18 months that people will help you fill their position if you've had a conversation about them being ready to leave your organization. Now, I go as far in the book as to suggest we should build the network of employers that share similar cultures for our people to go work for.
Wow.
And one of my personal goals is to get to a point where I am a part of my HR team's bonus is based on how many people they promoted to other companies in better jobs. That's how strongly I believe in how this works. And each one of us is part of a larger talent system. It's understanding where we are in that system and that people are going to move. People are going to come to work for us and they're going to leave. They're going to try to go find a better job. So instead of being resistant to that, how can we embrace that? How can we be this great place for people to work and learn while they're on their talent journey? Because we're still a place to work while they're on their talent journeys. Like that's not going to change. So why don't we embrace the fact that they're on their talent journey and help them get to the best possible spot they can be? And yes, they're going to leave. Again, we started out by talking about trust and communicating openly and honestly to promote effective teamwork. This is a reality. None of us want to say that. We want to say, well, we can keep people longer. We'll offer them more money. We'll offer them better benefits. We'll offer them a different work schedule. Do you really want to keep paying somebody more to keep them if they don't want to be there? Why do we do that? We do it because we don't want to go through the work of hiring somebody else. But and again, this becomes this whole idea of intention. If we shift our intention just a little bit around our talent and we embrace this flow, and we make it okay to have conversations about leaving an organization to do something better or more interesting, however that other person sees that, it changes an awful lot of dynamics within our organization.
And you probably become like, you just think about the negative. Well, now I got these great people who are leaving, but I would think if that's the environment you are creating, you become a talent magnet.
Sure. Yeah. And you know what? The reality is you also get people who continue to get learning and don't leave because they love it. They want to be part of that environment. Right.
Yeah. And I forget, this was it may have been Steve Jobs said this. I don't remember who said it, but what was the quote? It was somebody asked the question, what if you spend all that money and all that time training people and then they leave?
Yeah. Well,
Right. And he said, well, what if you don't and they stay?
yeah. So you know what? There was a comic, and I think it was in the Times. I have tried to find the source of that because you're absolutely right. And the comic strip was a CEO talking to a CFO. And the CFO says, well, what if we spend all that money on training and education and they leave? And the CEO looks at him and says, well, what if we don't and they stay?
Yeah.
But I think the reality is that's how we look at it. What if we spend this money on them and they leave? And here's the challenge that I would give people. I really believe so I'll say two more things about the book. I do a little bit of a deep dive into what some of the big systems are doing around talent. And I talk about the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation and their talent pipeline management curriculum, which is very robust, but it's being used across some big systems. And they're looking at like 15-year time horizon for talent in like healthcare and automotive. And so there's some of these trends that are going on in our country right now that as small and mid-market companies, we don't have any visibility to, but they're going to affect us as the demographics of our population change. Our ability to hire people just from a demographic number standpoint is going to get more challenged than what we're experiencing today. So the question
Is that because, Mark, the population is getting older?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got the population shifts. We've got a lot of people who are going to have a hard time making the skills jump. I mean, I think, AI is coming on so fast. And all of the skills you need to do jobs that were, pretty manual and relatively unskilled just a few years ago are going to require a different level of skill set. So, I think we're just going to have a more and more difficult time filling some of those positions, but some of what's being anticipated and worked on a large system basis is pretty interesting. And it's actually available to small and mid-market companies. It's not like it's unavailable to us. You don't know about it. But I think the advantage that we have as, smaller mid-market companies is that all of that stuff is very, what I call enterprise centric. So it's all about protecting the organization. And I think what we bring to the table is we can also be people-centric. So if we can be people-centric and enterprise-centric, I think that's a great winning strategy. And I think that by going out and learning about some of these things that are already out there that we can put to work in terms of enterprise-centric talent planning strategies and looking at doing very personalized talent investment and really truly being interested in helping people be successful and grow. Now we don't have to necessarily, if we have a technical position, and I have a number of technical positions that are one person. I don't have a whole department of technical positions. So when I lose one of those technical people, it's a big deal. But if I know they're going to go and they can help me fill the role, and I'm planning for that transition, it's far less difficult for me to have that happen and have that event happen in my organization.
But that's important. I think what you just said is important, is that if you've got that environment where people understand when it's time for them to move up or on, you're actually going to help them do that. And it's not going to be a scary situation. What winds up happening is people are they're more transparent about it.
Yep.
And therefore, you've got more time to say, okay, if that's what you're planning to do, I can help you do that. But at the same time, I need you to help me bring this other person up to speed in what you do. It just seems like you will have much smoother transitions that way.
Yeah. I mean, that would be the goal, right? But I also go as far in the book as to say, we don't offer health insurance. It's like, I'll say, hey, Mike, if you want to come to work for me, I'll give you health insurance, but you've got to commit to stay working for me for 3 years. You'd be like, what? Same with 401k. I think education is going to move into that it's going to be the greens fees. People are going to ask, well, what's your education benefit? And if you don't have one, if you don't have a strategy around investing in their growth, they're going to choose somebody a different place to work. We're not there yet, which is why I think as small to mid-market companies, we've got a real opportunity window right now, but we're going to get there. 5 years, I don't know what it is, but it's going to happen.
Love this. And I can't wait to share the new book, The Retention Trap. It sounds like a book I'm going to want to share with all my clients. So you've got a few baked in sales there. So that'll get you to bestseller status. But love this stuff. You mentioned it earlier, but I want to do it again as we wrap up. If people want to find out more about you, I know, you got the book coming out, you do some speaking, but give us a little kind of list. If people want to find out more about you or about the source and how to find that, tell us again, what's the best way for them to find you and find that information?
Yeah, so we have a website. It's i-leadership.com. That's got a lot of information on it. Mark Peters, Butterball Farms on LinkedIn. Those are probably the two easiest ways to get in touch with me directly. If someone's interested about the source, the West Michigan version of the source, it's gr.org or thesourcegr.org. I should have had that in front of me.
That's right. We'll make sure to kind of research that and put that in the show notes. So if it was wrong, look at the show notes and we'll make sure it's right.
Right. Otherwise, just Google the source Grand Rapids. I guarantee you it'll come up.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, I always say if you want a great company, you need a great leadership team. Mark, thanks for helping us get there today. This stuff was amazing.
Thank you for helping me to get to the leadership team I got today. So I kind of owe that directly to you. So I appreciate it.
Like I said earlier, the invoice is coming. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mike.